following the situations between the lovers and how a child has entered the situation, and there is a need to make a better decision with the child. Gu decides to be a man, be a father, and ensure he gets married to Kaio no matter what his family says, so he can be a good father to her child. He plans a proposal with Zhao and even ensures he does all the preparation for the proposal by himself so that she will see his efforts. After he is done, he calls her and asks her if she remembers what she had promised him the last time. She has no memory of promising him anything, but he tells her that he will remind her if she comes to the square where they were selling flowers the last time. Without doubting him, she prepares to go to the square, now knowing it will be her proposal. However, by the time she gets outside, she sees a driver who tells her Gu has sent him. She enters the car and the driver drives her to meet Bai instead. Bai has just been informed that someone else is pregnant for the love of her life, so she is aggrieved. She keeps screaming at Kaio, asking her if she now thinks she can use the child to enter into the family and calling her a loser. This causes Bai to attempt to hit Kaio, and she pushes her. In response, Bai touches her stomach and pushes it, so she falls. When Bai realizes what she has done, she suggests to her manager that she should call the police to help Kaio, but her manager tells her no and asks that they leave. With no fear, they leave the poor lady to be in pain. Coincidentally, Zhongling's call comes in and Kaio tells her friend to come and pick her up. She is taken to the hospital and her phone is switched off. Gu and Zhao try to call her repeatedly, but they can't reach her. Meanwhile, after Bai does what she has done, she goes to Mrs. Gu to confess, knowing so well that if Mrs. Gu knows about the child initially, she will never be in support. When Bai wakes up, she asks her friend what happened to her child, and her friend informs her the child is gone. She accepts it as her fate, saying that it wasn't meant to be. Mrs. Gu visits her and accuses her of wanting to use the child to get into the family. She tells Mrs. Gu that she doesn't have to worry because the child is gone, and Mrs. Gu stupidly gives her an unlimited card telling her that is her reward. After Mrs. Gu leaves, Su Huan comes there with gifts for her. He tries to console her, and when he sees through the door that Gu is on his way, he intentionally goes closer to her and gives her a kiss. When Gu enters, he misinterprets the situation, asking why Kaio is so insensitive that she is doing that when she has just lost his child. He fights Su Huan and leaves. He angrily goes to destroy the entire proposal ground. He cries and his mother comes to console him. He tells his mother that he really wanted to be a good father, and now the universe didn't even give him a chance. Bai, on the other hand, is disturbed about what she has done. She recalls that she had told Mrs. Gu about the incident and how she still wants Gu. Su Huan calls her to blackmail her, asking her if she knows she had committed murder. She asks him what he was thinking when he gave her that piece of information about the pregnancy and tells him not to call her again. That night, she kept seeing blood. Regardless, the following day, she starts preparing for her upcoming concert, which Zhao comes to tell her he won't be around for. When Kaio gets better, she is released from the hospital and she returns home. That morning, Gu's family sit for breakfast, but Gu remains in a bad mood. His father asks him about the contract he is working on, and he says he is on it, but his father asks him why he is that low in spirit, but he couldn't reveal the truth. Later, Su Huan joins the breakfast and Gu leaves. After he leaves, Mr. Gu asks Mrs. Gu what is happening, but she doesn't say anything. At home, Zhongling comes to ask her what had happened that day, and she narrates the issue. This makes Zhongling think that Bai will forget all she has done, and the next day, she will have a concert. Upon hearing about the concert, Kaio plans her revenge. The following day, Bai prepares for her concert with fear. Mrs. Gu visits her with Gu, and Gu even brings her flowers. She looks at him, remembering what she has done, but he tells her he should be courageous as it is her first concert in China, and she should be sure she will do well. She appreciates him for coming to support her, and she goes to play. As she plays, a background sound starts playing. It is the conversation she had with Kaio the day the incident happened before she pushed Kaio. Everyone wonders what is going on, and her mother immediately starts trying to stop the audio from playing. At that moment, the nemesis, Kaio, walked from the stairs to the middle of the scene. She recalls that when she was in the car, and she noticed that she car was going elsewhere, she sent a text with Zhongling, and she sent her location to her, telling her it come and find her there. Then she started recording everything before she got there. Mrs. Bia asks the securities to take Kaio away, but Gu stops them and asks Kaio if what he is hearing is actually true. He asks her why she hasn't told him, and she pushes his hands away, telling him that she doesn't want to speak with anyone about what had happened, and she had given the audio to the police, and the issue is with the police already. She walks away, and immediately, audios and videos of what had happened spread to the city. Mrs. Bai asks Bai's manager if she could stop the spread, but the manager tells her it is impossible. Bai locks herself in the room as she regrets what she has done. Zhao visits Bai asking her why she didn't inform him about what had happened before she made that kind of harsh decision. She asks him if she will get imprisoned, and he promises to do his best to help her. Suddenly, the police arrive and they arrest her. When Mr. Gu finds out about what has happened, he is shocked that Gu can't even protect his child. He reminds Mrs. Gu that no matter what, the child was a Gu, and they should have protected the child. And angrily, he breaks every connection he has with the Bai and says he will ensure justice is done. That night, Kaio stays in Su Huan's home, and she keeps drinking. She gets drunk, and he lays her to bed. When she wakes up, she tells him she is fine, and she wants to go home. Upon getting home, she meets Mrs. Bai and Zhao at her house. They try to beg her to forgive Bai, claiming she is just a child, but she asks Mrs. Bai what she will do if it was Bai's child that was killed, and she insists that she will never write a letter of forgiveness, so they should leave her house. Mrs. Bai kneels to beg her, but she insists and they leave. Outside the house, Zhao informs Mrs. Bai that Bai had confessed to the lawyer, and she told them Su Huan was also involved. As a result, Mrs. Bai assumes that it will mitigate Bai's punishment. Also, Zhao finds out Bai's manager is about to leave the country. She claims she wants to deal with Bai's business outside the country, but Zhao knows she has other things in mind. Gu attempts to visit Kaio, but he is too ashamed to even see her, so he stays by her door and leaves eventually. By the time the investigation ends, the lawyer tells Mrs. Bai that Bai will be imprisoned regardless because the police have evidence, and no matter what Su Huan says, it won't change anything unless they get a letter of forgiveness from Kaio, which can mitigate Bai's punishment. Not knowing what to do, they hire some thugs to force Kaio to forgive Bai. As a result, when Kaio opens her door the next day, she finds them, and they kidnap her. She wakes up while tied to a chair. They bring a paper and release her to write the letter. She tries to fight them, but they overpower her and they hit her. Fortunately, Gu comes in to save her. Together, they fight against the 4 thugs until they get out. Gu locks her in the car and continues the fight. He hits one of the thugs with a brick, and the thug gets angry and stabs him. The thugs run away while Kaio looks at him in pain. He is rushed to the hospital, and the doctors attend to him in a haste. His mother arrives and asks Zhao what had happened, but Zhao tells her he has no idea about what had happened because he wasn't there, and it was the police that could know. She finds out that he was with Kaio, and she goes to meet Kaio to know what had happened. She insists that since her son got involved with Kaio, several funny things have been happening to him, and she insists that Kaio is a bad luck and she should leave her son alone. She screams at Kaio, who feels bad about what has happened and cries. Eventually, when he wakes up, he sees his mother beside his bed, and the first thing he asks about was Kaio, and if she was fine. Mrs. Gu asks him why he doesn't care about himself and everything happening and begs him to leave Kaio. He tells her he can't leave her, and she tells him Kaio is fine. He sleeps again, and when he wakes up, he sees Kaio beside him. She appreciates him for coming to save her and asks how he had known she was in trouble. He reveals to her that their phone has started tracking each other, and when he found out she was in an abandoned building, he called the police and went to save him. When she appreciates him, he says he didn't need her appreciation, and he just wanted her to know that he wouldn't hurt her intentionally, and until the issue with Bai happened, he didn't even know she was pregnant, and he was sorry. He shows her the jewelry on his neck and reveals that he wanted to propose to her on that day. Zhao visits and tells him Bai has accepted to take the penalty for her acts, and she will be punished so he doesn't have to feel bad about what had happened to Bai. He also tells him that his father has given the great project to Su Huan to continue since he is in the hospital. When the investor for the project arrives, he asks for Gu, but Su Huan says Gu needs to rest. To their shock, when they enter the office, they see Gu there. Despite being injured, Gu attends to the project and returns to the hospital. Kaio visits asking why he hadn't rested, and he tells her he needed to stop Su Huan. He also tells her that Bai told him it was Su Huan who told her about the pregnancy, and that was why she reacted like that. Kaio refuses to believe that the Su Huan she knows would do something that bad. Gu gives Kaio the necklace he had brought, telling her that it belongs to her, and she can consider if she wants to take his proposal or not. That night, Su Huan meets Uncle Zhang, who insists that if he wants to get the company, he has to do more than he is doing. She returns home, and the following day, Su Huan visits her, telling her that it is his mother's memorial, and he wants her to go with him. She goes with him as he wishes. On the other hand, Gu presides over his team meeting for the great project. After the meeting ends, he gets a picture of Kaio and a call from someone telling him they will kill Kaio if he doesn't reveal the bid he has made for the project in 30 minutes. He begs his staff to work on a rough project for them to release, but unfortunately, one of his staff under Su Huan's payment releases the original project claiming that it was a mistake. After the memorial, Su Huan asks Kaio why she had been with Gu for the week, and she reminds him that he got injured for her and she has to care. He tells her he likes her and wants to with her, but she informs him that before he returned, she had fallen for Gu. She asks if he was the one who informed Bai about her pregnancy, and he admits it, but claims he didn't ask her to do what she had. Kaio tells him he isn't the lover she had when she was young, and she doesn't want to do anything with him again. When Mr. Gu finds out about the leaked project, he calls a family meeting and starts getting angry at Gu. However, Gu is more concerned about Kaio, and his father slaps him asking if she is more important than the company. When he sees her, he runs to hug her, and he shows her the picture that was sent to him. She reveals she was with Su Huan at his mother's memorial, and the picture was taken up close so Su Huan knew about it. She apologizes for going out without informing him, and they plan to deal with the issue together. On the other hand, Mr. Gu asks his siblings what they will do, and if the team can organize another bid. Su Huan insists that it won't be possible, and they can't get the bid again. He claims they can rather partner with the person that gets the bid so they can work together since the land is large. Mr. Gu accepts his suggestion and gives him the authority to take over the project from that day. Upon arriving at work the next day, Gu is shocked to enter his office with Kaio, and they see Su Huan on his table. Su Huan gives him a letter transferring him and tells him he will deal with the project. He also throws his picture at him asking him to leave. Kaio goes nearer to Su Huan asking him why he had to use his mother for that plot. He insists it was his mother's remembrance, and he didn't lie, so why not? She slaps him and leaves. Mrs. Gu finds out her son has been transferred to a construction ground. She goes to meet Mr. Gu telling him that under no circumstances should that have happened to her son. Mr. Gu insists that it was the company's decision and there is nothing he can do about it. She reminds him that the same boy had built that company until where it had reached and told him that if he didn't find his bastard son, what had happened wouldn't have happened. Mr. Gu gets a heart attack and she leaves. The company staff were very discouraged by what had happened. Aunt Feng, Gu's aunt whom he had fired her husband in the first episode, comes to meet Su Huan asking Su Huan to hire her husband again, and Su Huan hires his uncle, Zheng, as Gu's supervisor at the construction ground. That night, Gu calls Zhao who informs him that Jinai, their competitive company, will get the project, and it had been planned that Su Huan will work with him for execution. He believes there was someone behind Chen who had revealed his project and asks Zhao to investigate. The following day, he goes to the construction company and his supervisor. Zhang tells him he is to work by packing waste, without caring. He does all the jobs, and when his mother sees him, she breaks down in tears asking why her well-read son is doing that kind of job. She meets Kaio later telling her that although she wanted her son to marry a girl of good family, she can't stop him from loving Kaio, so she just hopes and prays that his love for her will be reciprocated. That night when he returned home, Kaio took care of him. The following day, he returns to work and Su Huan comes there and laughs at him for the kind of work he is doing, but he doesn't care. This continues until the following day. That day, they are to pack all the waste because they are expecting a delivery. Unfortunately, Zhang insists that the truck that will pack the waste can't work that day. He tries to meet with the driver, but the driver keeps using him to play games, and eventually, he decides that he and his team will work together to get things right. They try to pack all the waste that night, but they are unable to succeed. Since his team members are tired, he takes a rest with them before Zhao comes to drive him home. He asks Zhao about Chen's investigation, and Zhao insists he hasn't found anything, but Gu claims it can't be a mistake and someone was behind Chen. When he arrives home, he starts working on building his own company. He tells Kaio about his plans, and she promises to work with him. Suddenly, they get a call that the truck driver who would deliver that night got into an accident because of the waste that were on the way and the truck capsized. Zhang blames Gu and reports to Su Huan. Gu and Kaio go to the hospital to visit the injured driver, and Su Huan goes to report to Mr. Gu about the issue. This makes Mr. Gu wonders why his judicious son could make that kind of careless mistake. At work, Zhang insists on firing the person in charge of the project, and this makes all the staff point hands at Gu. As a result, he gets fired too. Gu refuses to believe that he can make that kind of costly mistake, so he calls the team and asks them what had happened after he left. They tell him that when they got tired, Quan said he would finish the work. He asks if there was a CCTV around, and they tell him there was one, and when they checked, they saw a car behind the truck, and the truck fell to the back. He found out it was Zhang in the car. He goes to the truck and checks the truck. The new supervisor asks him what he is doing since he has been fired, but he doesn't answer. He realizes that the tires of the truck had been destroyed, which shouldn't be since it was bought some time ago, and he finds out that they should be using 10 trucks according to the rules, but they are using 5 because Zhang had embezzled some of the money. He goes to find the injured man who had woken and spoke to him about what had happened. When Kaio sees Su Huan, she refuses to speak with him. He asks her why she had refused to forgive him, but she can forgive Gu, but she walks away. Zhang is in a meeting with Su Huan when Gu comes to accuse him of what he had done. He tries to deny, claiming Gu just wants to use the opportunity to get his job back, but when the interrogation shows what had happened, Su Huan fires him and asks Gu to return, but Gu refuses. Mrs. Gu finds out her husband has cancer. Su Huan brings new doctors to treat Mr. Gu, and although Mrs. Gu isn't comfortable with it, she allows it. After Mrs. Gu leaves, Su Huan pushes Mr. Gu around and tells him he has told Gu to return, but Gu says he wants to start a business, so Mr. Gu tells Su Huan to let Gu be. Mrs. Gu spends the night with Gu and Kaio, and she supports his business idea. The next morning, Kaio's mother visits, and when she finds out about the union, she refuses to accept it. This causes an argument between the both mothers, and Gu sees his mother off. When Gu wakes up the next morning, he sees Mrs. Kaio with a clock. She insists that Gu must make her food, and when Gu's food isn't to her satisfaction, she gets angry. She also asks Gu to clean the entire house. By the time Kaio comes in and finds out, she persuades her mother to stop, but her mother insists Gu must work to get her. She teases her mother and sends her off to the room while the lovers play their love. That evening, her mother insists they remain together, and they eat. They enjoy their meal as she keeps talking about how good her daughter is, and how she wants her daughter to get a good husband. They tell her about how the illegitimate son has returned and taken Gu's position, so they are now business partners. The following day, Su Huan visits Kaio, and he sees her mother by the door. When he realizes that she still remembers him, he asks to take her for breakfast. He reveals that he is the illegitimate son, and Mrs. Kaio says she doesn't like Gu. Su Huan uses this opportunity to reveal Kaio's miscarriage to her by asking her how Kaio is doing, and how the doctor told her to rest well. Mrs. Kaio gets so angry, she goes home, finds Kaio's hospital report, and confronts them. She tells Gu she doesn't want him to marry her daughter and goes to the room. Kaio goes to apologize to her mother, telling her she didn't know how to reveal the issue and promises her that Gu will surely take her off because he loves her. On the other hand, Uncle Zhang tells Su Huan that Mr. Gu doesn't have much life to live again, and they have to make future plans. The following day, Gu visits his mother and begs her to come and apologize to Kaio's mother. The two mothers come together as the kids reveal that they want to marry. Mrs. Kaio refuses the offer, and Mrs. Gu asks the kids to leave. She drinks with Mrs. Kaio while promising her she will ensure she takes care of Kaio and make sure she doesn't suffer. At the end, Mrs. Kaio accepts. Mrs. Kaio meets with Gu later, asking him to promise he will take care of her daughter, and he makes the promise. Upon getting to the hospital, Mrs. Gu finds out her husband has entered a coma, and she isn't even allowed to see him. Also, Chen suddenly rushes to Kaio's house to report himself. He reveals that it was Zhao who had given him the original document and asked him to post it. When he tried to reveal it, Zhao told him that no one will believe him if he did, and now that he found out, he is to be convicted for it. He wants Gu to help him. Gu tells him to confess to the police, and he goes to confront Zhao. Zhao admits that Gu isn't a good friend, and if he wants to continue life with Kaio, he can continue. He asks him how he thought he would feel when he took the love of his life, Bai. Gu reveals he didn't know Zhao had feelings for Bai, and he should have talked. Zhao tells him he did it as a revenge for what had happened to Bia, and Gu walks away angrily, as Zhao tells him he didn't care about him at all, neither did he care about the friendship. Gu goes home in tears and hugs Kaio. He meets with his mother the following day, and his mother insists that since all the issues have been solved, they should go to his father on the hospital bed and explain that he was innocent, and he should be reinstated. He tells his mother that all he wants is that justice should be done, and he doesn't care any longer. Suddenly, he gets a message that the company has withdrawn the case without his consent. He realizes that Su Huan had intentionally withdrawn the case to ensure that Zhao isn't punished since the issue worked in his favor. He goes to confront Su Huan for what he had done, but Su Huan says that he doesn't want the company's name to be soiled for anything, that is why. At that moment, they receive a call that Mr. Gu is to undergo an emergency operation. All the family stay in the hospital as they wait for the doctor, and the doctor announces that Mr. Gu is dead. Gu cries to Kaio about how he didn't treat his father well, and how his father was angry with him before death. Following the death, his will was read, and he gives just 10% of his shares in the company to Gu and gives 50% to Soo-hwan. Mrs. Gu can't believe her ears. She visits the lawyer again to ensure no one was there when he received the will, and he says yes. On the other hand, Soo-hwan finds out that they have visited the lawyer, and he meets Uncle Jong and laughs that there is nothing they can do about the will again, and he will be declared the owner of the company. Meanwhile, Bai gets sentenced to 2 years imprisonment. She writes a letter to Kaio and asks Zhao to deliver it. In the letter, she apologizes to Kaio. Just as Zhao is about to leave, Kaio advises him to stop hurting the people that love him. Mr. Gu's room is cleaned, and the cleaners give Gu the piece of puzzle he played with Mr. Gu as a child. When he tries to arrange the puzzle, he finds a piece with a number in it. He goes to show his mother, who recognizes the date as their wedding anniversary. She assumes it will be a key to a safe and goes to their safe, only to find out everything in the safe has been given to Soo-hwan. She confronts Soo-hwan to check all the safe. She opens the one that the code opens, but it is empty, so Soo-hwan tells them never to come to his company and cause nuisance. While they think about what could be wrong, the lawyer visits them and reveals that he recalls that the will that Mr. Gu gave him was sealed with a yellow old seal, but the one that was red was a new seal. They figure Soo-hwan had tampered with the seal. She asks the lawyer if he knew anything about a safe with that password, and the lawyer tells them that Mr. Gu kept a painting in that safe. They figure the painting will be in Soo-hwan's office, so Kaio goes to the company and tips the staff to go for lunch. He enters Soo-hwan's office, and she sees the painting. When she checks the tip of it, she finds a document. Suddenly, someone opens the door to the office. At Soo-hwan's inauguration ceremony, as he gives his speech, a video starts playing. It is the video of Mr. Gu reciting his will. Uncle Jung tries to change it, but they pin him to the chair. The video reveals that Mr. Gu had given 50% of his shares to Gu and not Soo-hwan. On the day Kaio had tried to take the drive, it was one of the staff that had entered, and she told him she wanted to reveal the truth. The lawyer recalls that Soo-hwan had told him one day that Mr. Gu wanted to change his will and had gotten him drunk to know where the will was. When the lawyer was drunk, he went to change the will without the lawyer's consent. He walks away with Uncle Jung ashamed that it was the painting he had given Mr. Gu as a gift that Mr. Gu hidden his nemesis. That night, he recalls that Mr. Gu had said Gu had become blunt, and he wondered if he was just a sharpening stone for Gu. Eventually, Gu returns as the chairman, and he transfers some of his staff to the new company he is building. He is meant to have lunch with his mother and Kaio, but he receives a call from Soo-hwan to meet him at the rooftop. Upon getting there, Soo-hwan gets into a fight with him. When his mother gets to the office, she receives the voice message that he had left that he was at the rooftop. When they rush to the rooftop, they see that Soo-hwan is about to stab him. He says he had been waiting for that moment to avenge his mother's death, but Mrs. Gu tells him that Gu isn't to be blamed, and Gu even drove after him to ensure the accident didn't happen, and Gu almost lost his life. She insists that if he wants to take a life, he should take her own. Soo-hwan calms down and starts crying. As they leave, Gu tells his mother that he doesn't want to pursue any issue with Soo-hwan, and when Soo-hwan returns to the country, they will live as family. He also goes to meet Zhao, and Zhao tells him Bai is doing fine. He tells Zhao that whether he believes it or not, he loves him, and he has always taken him as a brother. He continues with work, and after a meeting about his new company, his mother calls him to come to the receptionist. She puts a notice that that day is his wedding, reminding the couples that they have been so busy with work that they had forgotten they have to get married. Gu carries Kaio happily and tells her they should go to the marriage registry to register their marriage, and the series ends happily.